Monarchia, the day faith died. There are moments in history when an empire changes forever. Not when the first shot is fired, not when the first soldier dies, not even when a king is betrayed. Sometimes an empire changes when a single idea dies. The Imperium of man, that idea was simple. Humanity would have no gods, no priests, superstition or faith. Only reason and only science. Only the cold certainty that mankind would master its own destiny. The Emperor of Mankind called it the Imperial Truth, and for centuries his armies carried that truth across the stars. World after world surrendered, civilizations fell. Alien empires were destroyed and humanity was reunited. Wherever the Great Crusade went, the message was the same. There were no gods. There was only mankind, but one Primarch could not accept that. He believed that humanity needed something more. He believed that the Emperor was more than a man. He believed that the universe itself demanded worship. And wherever his legion conquered a world, they did something no other legion was willing to do. They stayed, built, preached. They raised temples, they converted. They turned conquered populations into believers. And they did it all in the name of the Emperor. The Legion called themselves the Word Bearers, and their Primarch was Lorgar Aurelian. For decades the Emperor tolerated it, until one day he didn't. On a distant world called Khur stood a city unlike anything else in the Imperium. A city so beautiful that its inhabitants called it perfect. A city whose towers reached into the heavens. A city built as an offering to the Emperor. Its name was Monarchia. And when the Emperor finally decided that Lorgar had gone too far, he did not merely destroy the city, he made Lorgar watch. And in the ashes of Monarchia, the Horus Heresy began. Before the ashes. To understand Monarchia, we first have to understand something that is easy to forget. The Word Bearers were not originally the Word Bearers. They began as the 17th Legion, the Imperial Heralds. Their purpose was the same as other legions: bring worlds into compliance, destroy resistance, spread the Imperial truth, and make humanity one. The Legion was exceptionally good at that one part of that mission. They were fanatical. The Imperial Heralds were known for destroying idols, religious institutions, and symbols of superstition. They were iconoclasts. Their mission was not to replace one religion with another. It was to destroy the very idea that religion was necessary. Then their Primarch was found, Lorgar Aurelian. And this changed everything. Lorgar had been raised on Colchis, a world where religion was woven into every aspect of life. For Lorgar, belief was not a weakness, it was a foundation of civilization. Faith gave humanity purpose, faith gave suffering meaning. Faith explained why humanity existed. And when Lorgar met the Emperor, he believed he had finally found the answer. Not a king, not merely a father, a god. The Emperor rejected that interpretation completely, but Lorgar did not. Instead, he began to reshape his legion around his own beliefs. The Imperial Heralds became the Word Bearers, and the Legion began doing something almost unheard of during the Great Crusade. They worshipped their Primarch's father, publicly, openly, and relentlessly. Where other legions conquered a world and moved on, the Word Bearers remained. They built monuments, they established shrines, they taught the population about the divinity of the Emperor. They wanted compliance to mean more than military surrender. They wanted conversion. That distinction would become catastrophic, because the Great Crusade measured victory in worlds conquered. Lorgar measured victory in souls converted. And those two objectives were not the same. The perfect city. On the world of Khur, the word-bearers built their greatest monument, Monarchia, the perfect city. It became a symbol of everything Lorgar believed. The city was beautiful, ordered, devoted, human, and above all, faithful. The word-bearers had conquered Khur roughly a century before its destruction. But they did not simply conquer it, they transformed it. Monarchia became the jewel of Lorgar's legion, a physical representation of his belief that the Great Crusade could be something more than conquest. The Imperium could unite humanity, and once united, humanity could understand the truth. Or so Lorgar believed. There was only one problem. The Emperor had never intended the Great Crusade to create a religion. In fact, the exact opposite was true. The imperial truth was built upon the rejection of religion. The Emperor believed superstition had held humanity back. He had seen the age of strife. He knew what ignorance and irrational belief could do. The galaxy was full of horrors that humanity did not understand. The warp was real. Psychers were real. Demons were real. But the Emperor deliberately refused to call those things gods. He wanted humanity to grow beyond its dependence upon them. Lorgar saw things differently. And for a surprisingly long time, the Emperor allowed it. That is one of the most important details in this story, because Monarchia did not happen immediately after Lorgar was discovered. The word-bearers had spent decades spreading their faith, and there had already been private warnings, but Lorgar did not listen. The word-bearers became slower and slower, not because they were militarily incompetent, quite the opposite. They were conquering worlds successfully, but the conquest wasn't enough for them. They needed to build, preach, and convert. The Great Crusade was becoming secondary to the Great Sermon, and eventually the Emperor decided that the lesson would have to be public. The Order. The Order came down. Robert Guilliman, the Ultramarines, Malcador the Sigillite, and ultimately the Emperor himself. The 17th Legion was to be corrected. The target was Monarchia, and the message was not subtle. The city would be destroyed, not conquered, not occupied. Again destroyed. The people would be evacuated. The city would be reduced to ruins, and the word-bearers would be forced to witness the consequences of their disobedience. Now, the exact dating of the event has shifted somewhat between sources. The novel The First Heretic places the destruction in 962 M30, while later Black Library material gives M63 M30. Modern reference material also often expresses the date relative to the latter Isstvan campaign, rather than simply using a single absolute date. This is a useful reminder for our series. The broad event is extremely well established, but the precise chronology, who knows the exact date? That is where Black Library's history sometimes moves, and that will matter throughout this series, because we're not simply going to tell you what happened, we are going to tell you which version of what happened that we're talking about. The evacuation. Before the city died, its people were given a chance to leave. The Ultramarines arrived, the population was evacuated, and the inhabitants were made to understand that their city was going to be destroyed. Among those people was a woman named Cyrene Valancian. She was a believer, a citizen of Monarchia. Like thousands of others, she had been caught in the conflict between two competing visions of humanity. One believed that faith was necessary, the other believed that faith itself was a danger, and neither side was willing to compromise. Then came the final warning. The people were evacuated, the city emptied, and one final distress signal was permitted to escape. The word-bearers received it, and they came. The city is gone. Imagine being Lorgar Aurelian in that moment. You are a Primarch. You have conquered hundreds of worlds, your legion numbers in the tens of thousands. You believe you have served your father faithfully. And then you arrive at the greatest city your legion has ever built, and there is nothing left, only ash. The word bearers found the site of Monarchia transformed into a wasteland. Their greatest achievement was gone, their temples were gone, monuments, and their city was gone. Their Primarch had no idea why. Then Lorgar confronted Malcador. And this is where the story becomes intensely personal, because Lorgar did not understand the punishment. To him, he had committed no crime. He had worshipped his father, he had honored him, and he had spread his word. He had created a civilization that loved the Emperor. Why was this wrong? Why was devotion a crime? Why was Monarchia a mistake? Malcador attempted to explain. Lorgar did not accept the answer. The Primarch struck him down. And then the Emperor came. Father and son. This is one of the most important conversations in the entire Horus Heresy, because the Emperor does not simply punish Lorgar, he destroys the foundation upon which Lorgar has built his entire identity. The Emperor tells him the truth. He is not a god. He does not want to be worshipped. The temples are an affront, and so are the sermons. The delays are unacceptable. The Great Crusade exists to unite humanity, not create religion, not to establish a priesthood, not to replace the old gods with a new one. Lorgar has misunderstood his father's purpose, and now his father has made certain that everyone knows it. The entire 17th Legion is gathered, and they are ordered to kneel. The word bearers kneel. Their Primarch kneels. And before them stands Robu Guilliman, Malcador, and the Emperor. The Legion that has spent decades proclaiming the Emperor's divinity is publicly told that the object of their worship rejects them. This is humiliation, but humiliation is not heresy, yet. That distinction matters. At this moment, Lorgar is not a chaos worshipper. He has not betrayed the Imperium. He has not pledged himself to ruinous powers. He is just a broken son. And that difference is essential to understanding what happens next. Guilliman. It is also important to understand Guilliman's role, because later retellings can make Monarchia appear to be almost a simple personal conflict between Guilliman and Lorgar. It wasn't. Guilliman was executing the Emperor's order. The Ultramarines destroyed the city because they were commanded to. The tragedy is that Lorgar did not see it that way. He saw Guilliman, he saw the Ultramarines, he saw the Legion that had physically erased their greatest achievement, and a wound began to form. Not only between two brothers, but between two philosophies. Guilliman represented the Imperium as the Emperor wanted it to be. Lorgar represented the Imperium as he believed it should be. Order versus faith. Progress versus meaning. The rational versus the spiritual. And neither Primarch understood how deeply the other had been wounded. That resentment would survive for decades. The silence. Then Lorgar disappeared. He withdrew, he secluded himself, the Legion waited. And the word bearers had no idea what their future would be. The Primarch, who had always possessed certainty, now had none. His father had told him that the Emperor was not a god, but Lorgar had spent his entire life searching for something worthy of worship. And now the central pillar of his worldview had been destroyed, but something else remained, the question. If the Emperor was not a god, then what was? That question would become more important than anything else, and this is where Erebus and Khur become critical. Khur. Khur was not simply another space marine, he was part of Lorgar's life before the Emperor. He had helped shape the Primarch's religious worldview. He understood Lorgar's need for meaning, and he knew something that the Imperial truth could not answer. The universe was not empty, the warp was real. Humanity had always believed in gods, and perhaps those beliefs had not been entirely wrong. This is the beginning of great danger. Because Lorgar did not immediately embrace chaos, he went looking for the truth. That distinction is incredibly important. Lorgar's greatest weakness was not that he wanted power, it was that he genuinely wanted answers. He wanted to know why humanity existed, why suffering existed, why the warp even existed, and why psychic phenomena existed, and whether something greater existed beyond the material universe. His mistake was assuming that because something claimed to be a god, it deserved worship. Chaos would exploit that mistake perfectly. The Word-Bearers after Monarchia. The Word-Bearers returned to the Great Crusade, but they were not the same legion. According to later Black Library material, Lorgar responded to the Emperor's rebuke by dramatically accelerating the Legion's campaigns. The Legion that had once been criticized for moving too slowly suddenly began conquering worlds with terrifying efficiency. This is one of the great ironies of the heresy. The Emperor wanted Lorgar to stop wasting time building temples, so Lorgar stopped. At least on the surface. The Word-Bearers became faster, more violent, more efficient. They appeared to be repentant, but something had changed. The old faith had not disappeared. It had gone underground, and Lorgar began searching. The Pilgrimage. Lorgar returned to Kolkis. He began examining the old beliefs of his homeworld, the religions that had existed before the Emperor, the gods that Lorgar himself had once rejected after discovering the Emperor. Then he began asking a dangerous question. What if Kolkis had been right about one thing? What if gods really existed? Lorgar sought answers from his brother Magnus. Magnus knew more about the warp than any other Primarch, so Lorgar asked him. Had Magnus encountered anything in the warp that could genuinely be called a god? Magnus did not give the answer Lorgar wanted, and so Lorgar continued to search. The Word-Bearers embarked on what would become known as the Pilgrimage. They were not yet marching beneath the banners of the Chaos Gods, they were searching for the truth, and the further they went, the closer they came to finding it. The first great lie. This is where we need to pause, because there is a temptation to simplify the story. To say Lorgar got angry at the Emperor, then Erebus showed him chaos, then Lorgar became evil. But that isn't the tragedy. The tragedy is that Lorgar's fundamental belief was not entirely wrong. He was right that the warp existed. He was right that humanity had encounters, entities within it. He was right that psychic power was real. He was right that the Emperor was concealing enormous truths about the universe. And he was right that humanity had been interacting with the warp for thousands of years. His fatal mistake was believing that discovering a god meant discovering something worth worship. Chaos did not have to invent Lorgar's faith. It only had to give his faith somewhere to go. Erebus. And waiting in the shadows was Erebus. Erebus understood something Lorgar did not. The warp did not care whether Lorgar wanted truth. It cared whether Lorgar could be useful. The Chaos Gods did not need Lorgar to understand them. They needed him to believe in them. And Erebus became the bridge between the broken Primarch and the powers beyond reality. This is why Erebus is so important to the history of the heresy. He isn't simply the evil word-bearer. He is one of the people who understands how corruption works. He understands that you rarely convince someone to abandon everything they believe. You take whatever they already believe and twist it. You don't destroy faith, you redirect it, and that is precisely what happens to the 17th Legion. The Legion begins to change. The Wordbearers had spent decades teaching humanity to worship the Emperor. Now they began searching for something else, and their methods changed. The old Imperial faith had demanded obedience. The new faith demanded sacrifice. The Wordbearers began experimenting with forbidden knowledge. They encountered ancient cultures, warp entities, old rituals, and eventually the beings they had been searching for, the Chaos Gods. But the Wordbearers did not immediately become servants of a single god. Their destiny was stranger. Lorgar would ultimately pursue chaos undivided, a totality, a belief that the four great powers were different aspects of a greater truth, and that was precisely what made the Wordbearers so dangerous. They did not simply worship chaos, they sought to understand it. The Gal Vorbak. And then came Argol Tal, one of the central figures in this story, a warrior who once believed completely in the Emperor, a warrior who had been humiliated at Monarchia, a warrior who followed Lorgar into the unknown, and eventually a warrior who had become something the Imperium had never seen before. The Gal Vorbak possessed Space Marines, Astartes, and warp entities sharing one body. The experiment would prove chaos could do something the Imperium had spent the entire Great Crusade denying. The warp could inhabit humanity. It could change it. It could empower it and consume it, and the Wordbearers would learn how to weaponize that relationship. The 17th Legion was no longer simply seeking the truth. It was becoming the instrument of the truth it had found. The irony of Monarchia. And here lies the ultimate irony. The Emperor destroyed Monarchia because Lorgar believed in gods. Lorgar responded by searching for gods, and he found them. The Emperor wanted to prevent humanity from worshipping the powers of the warp. Lorgar eventually became one of the most important figures in bringing those powers into the heart of the Imperium. The Emperor wanted humanity to understand that the warp was dangerous. Lorgar proved just how dangerous it was. But there is another irony. The Wordbearers would eventually help create the religion that the Emperor had tried to prevent, because 10,000 years later the Imperium would worship him. The imperial truth would be gone. The Emperor would be a god. The very thing Lorgar believed in at Monarchia would eventually become the dominant religion of humanity. But Lorgar would not live to see it the way he imagined, and by then it would be far too late. What Monarchia actually caused. So what did Monarchia actually cause? Not the heresy by itself. That distinction matters. The heresy had many causes. Horus's corruption, the resentment of Primarchs, the Emperor's secrecy, Magnus and the Webway, the warrior lodges, the ambitions of the traitor legions, the manipulation of chaos, the rivalry between brothers, and a dozen other fractures. But Monarchia created something uniquely dangerous. It created a Primarch who no longer trusted his father, and desperately wanted an explanation for why his father had rejected him. That Primarch had a legion. That legion had thousands of warriors who shared his humiliation. And within that legion were men who already knew the old religions of Colchis, men like Erebus, men like Warfarin. They had spent decades building the ideology and machinery that would eventually become chaos worship. Monarchia did not create the machinery. It gave the machinery a reason to operate. The Black Library record. The record changes. Before we leave Monarchia, we need to talk about the most important feature of the series, the lore changes. Not necessarily because the old stories are wrong. Games Workshop's history of the Horus Heresy has always been presented through layers of fictional records, unreliable narrators, later discoveries, and expanding accounts. The Wordbearer is a perfect example of this. The modern Black Books explicitly describe the 17th Legion as originally being known as the Imperial Heralds, with the latter title Wordbearers emerging after Lorgar's reunification with its Legion. They also emphasise that the Legion's religious tendencies existed before its eventual fall to chaos, and that matters. Because the modern version of Lorgar's fall is much more gradual than the simple idea of Monarchia happened, therefore Lorgar became a traitor. Instead, the story becomes a progression. Faith, humiliation, then doubt, then searching, then forbidden knowledge, then revelation, then corruption, then conspiracy, betrayal, and finally war. That distinction will be important throughout the series, because every traitor legion will have its own version of this process. The First Heretic. The modern Black Library novel The First Heretic is particularly important because it places us directly inside the Wordbearer's transformation. The story begins with Monarchia, but it doesn't end there. It follows the Legion as it searches for meaning after its public humiliation. The Wordbearers begin their pilgrimage. They encounter forces that exist beyond the material universe, and slowly chaos takes hold. Black Library's own description of the novel frames the Wordbearers' journey from their punishment at Monarchia through their search for purpose and their eventual encounter with the forces of chaos. That is why this book is so important to our series. It transforms Monarchia from a historical event into a psychological origin story. The road to heresy. The Wordbearers are now moving towards something they could not yet fully understand. The pilgrimage would take them far from the center of the Imperium, far from the Emperor, far from the Imperial truth, and close to the warp. Eventually they would discover Cadia. They would encounter the forces of chaos. They would uncover ancient truths. And they would learn how to commune with the powers beyond the veil. But there is something important to remember. At the beginning, Lorgar still wanted the truth. He wasn't looking for an excuse to betray the Emperor, he was looking for an answer, and Chaos gave him one. That answer was a lie, but it was a very convincing lie. Why the Emperor's decision mattered. Was the Emperor wrong to destroy Monarchia? That question has no simple answer. From the Emperor's perspective, Lorgar was undermining the central ideology foundation of the Great Crusade. The Wordbearers were wasting resources. They were spreading a belief system that contradicted imperial policy. They were teaching conquered populations to worship the Emperor rather than embrace the imperial truth. And the Emperor had warned Lorgar multiple times. From that perspective, Monarchia was a punishment. From Lorgar's perspective, it was betrayal. And from the perspective of history, it was both. That is what makes the Horus Heresy so compelling. Almost every catastrophe begins with someone believing that they are justified. The Seed of Calth. There is another reason Monarchia matters, because years later the Wordbearers would turn their anger toward the Ultramarines, the legion responsible for destroying their perfect city, and eventually that hatred would find its target, Calth. But that is a story for another episode, because by the time the Wordbearers arrive at Calth, they will no longer be the legion that knelt in the ashes of Monarchia. They will have learned the secrets of the warp. They will have commanded and communed with demons. They will have prepared for war, and the Ultramarines will have no idea what is coming. The beginning of the heresy. Years later, Horus would fall. The War Master would turn against his father. The Legion would choose sides. Isstvan would burn. Prospero would die. Calth would bleed. And the Ruin Storm would tear the galaxy apart. Eventually, the traitor legions would march upon Terra. But the first legion to truly understand what chaos could offer was the 17th, the Word Bearers. And the man at the centre of it all was the Primarch who once wanted nothing more than to worship his father. Lorgar, the Arisen, the bearer of the Word, the first heretic. The ashes of Monarchia. Return to Monarchia, forget the armies, forget the Primarchs, forget the future. Look at the city. Once it was perfect. Its people believed that they were building something eternal. They believed that the Emperor had united humanity. They believed that their faith had meaning, and then the Imperium came. Their city disappeared, their Primarch was humiliated, their legion was forced to kneel, and the man who had spent his entire life searching for a god was told by the one he believed worthy of worship that he was not a god at all. Lorgar left Monarchia broken, but he did not leave faith behind, he took it with him, and he went looking for something worthy of it. He would find something, and what he found would eventually reach into the heart of the Imperium, because chaos rarely begins with hatred. Sometimes it begins with a question, sometimes it begins with grief, sometimes it begins with a desperate need to believe you are suffering, and your suffering has meaning, and sometimes all it takes to turn a loyal son into a traitor is to convince him that his father has lied to him. Monarchia was destroyed in the name of the imperial truth, but from its ashes came the first great lie, and the galaxy would burn for it. Next episode, the Word Bearers, the first traitors. Monarchia is gone, Lorgar has been humiliated, the 17th Legion has been forced back into the Great Crusade, but Lorgar still needs answers, and there are men within his legion who know where to find them. Erebus, Corferin, Argyltel, and beyond them something ancient is waiting, something that has been watching humanity since before the Emperor ever reached the stars. The Word Bearers are about to begin their pilgrimage, and they're going to discover that the gods are real.